What happens when the blood flow, the medial side of the frontal lobe is cut off, and that's the responsibility of the anterior cerebral artery. Hi, welcome back to Neurosketch with Dr. Kenny, and today we are talking about the anterior cerebral artery. We are mapping its route and the clinical significance. So let's go. So we have already seen how the anterior cerebral artery is formed from the internal carotid artery in the previous video. It is one among the terminal branches of the internal carotid, and then once it's formed, it travels within the longitudinal fissure, as you can see. So we have bilateral anterior cerebral artery on either side, left and right, and then they sweep back and around the corpus callosum, and then while it does so, it gives two main branches, and that would be the pericallosal branch. Peri something around the pericallosal, or something around the corpus callosum, and then the other branch would be the callosal marginal branch, or the callosal marginal artery. So they sweep around, they walk around the corpus callosum. They supply almost the whole of the medial part of the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe, and this is the territories, the surface territories of the anterior cerebral artery. So the anterior cerebral artery will supply the whole of the medial frontal lobe, so the whole of the medial frontal lobe, and the anterior party of the parietal lobe. So on the medial side, the whole of the anterior frontal lobe, the whole of the frontal lobe on the medial side, and then the anterior part of the parietal lobe. But what is the extent of the lateral surfaces? On the lateral surfaces, it supplies only the strip. So this strip is only thing that will be supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. So the lateral surfaces on the lateral side will never be supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. So the anterior cerebral artery will just supply the upper strip, like a thin line or thin strip, we can say, and that will be supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. So this will be the territory for the middle cerebral artery, and which is another discussion next time. And then this reddish or something would be the territory for the posterior cerebral artery. So that's a territory of the superficial territory of the anterior cerebral artery. But what about the deep? Does it supply deep structures? Yes, it supplies deep structures, and this is the basal ganglia. And then on the basal ganglia system, the anterior cerebral artery will supply this part of the caudate nucleus, the putamen, the globus pallidus on the other side. And then it does so by using the branch, the penetrating branch, and this is the recurrent artery of Ubna. So one among the most important arteries, the recurrent artery of Ubna, which is the branch of the anterior cerebral artery, and it supplies that part of the basal ganglia. What about other things? Does it supply the things? Yes. So this is, as we've said, it travels within the longitudinal fissure. So within the longitudinal fissure, it supplies this party of the frontal and the parietal lobe, and then it also supplies the corpus callosum, as we have seen there. So this is the corpus callosum, but this was coronal section. If we take the horizontal section, we can see the extent. We can also appreciate the extent of the anterior cerebral artery. So this is the horizontal section, so it supplies most of the anterior part because it is an anterior cerebral artery. So it supplies most of this part, the anterior part, but on the medial side. But also on the deep structures, we have seen also it supplies the corpus callosum. But one among the deep structures, we have said supplies the basal ganglia system, but the head of the caudate nucleus, part of the putamen, and the part of the putamen, the globus pallidus as well. And then you remember here we have the internal capsule. So this is the internal capsule, but the anterior limb of the internal capsule. So the anterior cerebral artery will also supply the anterior limb of the internal capsule. So the anterior limb of the internal capsule, the caudate nucleus, the head of the caudate nucleus, the anterior portion, the putamen, the putamen, this one, and the globus pallidus will also be supplied by the anterior cerebral arteries. So I think you can relate the functions of these parts, all of this basoganglia system and the frontal cortex and the parietal cortex, and you can come out with something that makes sense, that is tangible. So as we have seen, like on the medial side, it supplies from the whole of the frontal lobe and the party of the parietal lobe on the medial side. And also don't forget about this is the corpus callosum. It's also supplied, part of the corpus callosum is supplied by the anterior cerebral artery, but you can see it is also supplied by this posterior thing. Don't worry about this at this point. And then the deep party of the the corpus callosum also be supplied by something else, but don't worry about those stuffs. On the lateral extent now, it supplies this strip, the thin line, on this upper part, so it spares. It does not supply this part here over here. So what do we know about the functional parts of this? At least the sensory motor stuff. So we have primary somatosensory area and the primary motor area. So it is surprised on the somatosensory homunculus, somatosensory, and the primary motor areas. It supplies the medial side. We know that it supplies the medial side, but the medial side in terms of the sensory motor, it occupies the leg and the foot. So the leg and the foot will be supplied by the anterior cerebral artery, anterior cerebral artery. And then on the extent on the lateral surface now, if you remember now, we can put it. Yes. So so what do we know about the extent on the lateral surfaces? So we press the somatosensory homunculus, the somatosensory and the motor homunculus, and we know that the anterior cerebral artery will supply only this part here, only this. Remember the strip. So this is strip here, but this strip covers only the lower limb. So from the trunk all the way to the upper part of the body will not be supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. At least on the sensory, somatosensory and motor homunculus, it does not receive innervation or supply from the anterior cerebral artery. So what does it mean? It means that if someone has got damage to the anterior cerebral artery, something like a block, so the pattern that will be seen in will be the loss of sensory motor on on the legs and the foot, but it is contralateral. I think you remember that one. It will be contralateral. But if you have like larger strokes that involve the larger strokes of the anterior cerebral artery, the effect, it can cause the hemiparalysis. So like the whole half of the of the contralateral part of the body will be affected. Why? At least because it also involves the internal capsule. So if you have like a larger stroke on the anterior cerebral artery, to involve the internal capsule, and we know what passes in the internal capsule. So that's sort of repetition. And so because it supplies the whole of the frontal lobe, the medial side and the lateral side of the frontal lobe, so it can have effects like impaired judgment, flat affect. So all those that we say the higher cortical functioning of the brain, higher brain functioning will be affected. Remember that is the frontal lobe. That is the frontal lobe. But something very, very important here that can make you even better in differentiating is that if the patient has the prominent leg weakness more than arm weaknesses, you should suspect the anterior cerebral artery infarction or the anterior cerebral artery damage or stroke. Why? Because we know the arm is placed on the lateral side, so it's not supplied by the anterior cerebral artery, it's supplied by the middle cerebral artery, and the legs is supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. So if we have like more of the leg symptoms more than the arms, then you should suspect the anterior cerebral artery. So that was it from today's discussion of the anterior cerebral artery. I mean, I will at some point upload some questions, some clinical questions, and we explain how we solve these questions. But at this time, at least it's fair to say thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and follow. The next video will be the middle cerebral artery, and see you next time.